Tag TV US Canada brings you news and views from White House and State Department's press briefing.
This week marks the commemoration of the Holocaust. It's something that in the United States and around the world is recognized every single year, known as the Days of Remembrance. At the State Department today, we held a screening of an incredible documentary about a woman who is responsible for saving thousands of lives from the Polish ghetto during the Holocaust. And I'd like to introduce you to a couple incredible guests that we hosted here at the State Department to talk a little bit about her story and about the Holocaust and how we remember the Holocaust today. First, I'd like to introduce you all to a Holocaust survivor, Mr. Zygmunt Rolat, who is from Poland, and you've been in the United States since you were 17 years old. And sir, if I can say, it's incredible to look over here and see so many of your family members here with you. Looking forward to hearing your story. Also, our U.S. Special Envoy who handles Holocaust issues, Tom Yazagurdi. Tom, thank you so much for the work that you do. Let's start off talking about the screening here at the State Department of Arina Sandler's story. Tell me a little bit about that and how you all became involved.
Well, every year we commemorate the Days of Remembrance, as do other U.S. government agencies, and the Polish embassy came to us and who knows Mr. Rolat very well, and said they had an idea to bring Mr. Rolat, who knew Arina Sandler well. As you mentioned, Arina Sandler saved over 2,500 Jewish children from the Warsaw Ghetto, and we incorporated that into this year's commemoration, which we just had. And we screened the film about her life, this remarkable woman's life. And then Mr. Rolat addressed the audience and told us about how he knew Arina Sandler, how he got her story out, and his own experiences, some horrific, as a Holocaust survivor. So we were just really honored to have Mr. Rolat here with his family. His grandson was on stage with him to share, and this is open, by the way, to the entire State Department family, to share his story, and it was incredibly, not only one of survival, but very inspirational as well.
Sir, what would you like for people to know about your experience, your survival?
Well, I usually talk about, when we talk about the war years, how misplaced is sometimes, you know, the commentary that Jews were killed like sheep, that they didn't fight. And I usually point, you know, to my personal history, to our family, our small family, where my brother was the youngest of 6 partisans, young partisans. He was the youngest at 18, the oldest was 24 years old. And they were denounced, and they were captured by the Gestapo in Częstochowa, and they spent, for a whole night, they were tortured, and not one of the 6 betrayed their real names. Not one of the 6, even though tortured terribly, told the Germans where they got their arms. And in the morning they were taken to the Jewish cemetery and shot. And my father died in the Treblinka Uprising in 1943, when Jews rose up, and most of them died, but Treblinka was no more. That factory was destroyed by Jews. So of that I'm proud, but certainly it's important to point out, especially to those who think that the Jews did not fight back sufficiently. And of course we meet today to celebrate not only Yom HaShoah, but also the 75th anniversary of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, that heroic uprising, yes.
And part of what brought you here today to the State Department was for the screening of documentary about a woman who defied the Nazis. She was able to help thousands of children escape the Warsaw Ghetto. This is a story that you've been passionate about, and you've wanted to keep this story alive.
I've met Irina Sandler a number of times, and I must tell you that she was a saint. All I can say is that when she took my hands and held them, I couldn't hold back tears. And I see still that smiling, radiant face. And I finally said, I'm so happy I met you. Thank God for you. And of course, when we talked about what she did, how she did, and so on, time and again, her only complaint is that she didn't do enough. She didn't see many of the children were given away to the Polish convents and monasteries. And in a way, that was the safest way, because they were protected from possible denunciations and so on. They were safest there. But on the other hand, Irina Sandler's greatest worry was how will these children be retrieved if and when the war ends and their parents are no longer there, and how are we going to get these children back, at least to the families?
Because you followed this story very closely, how did she manage to get 2,500 children out?
Well, she was Irina Sandler was a social worker, really, working for the city of Warsaw before the invasion, the German invasion. And so she was given, as a social worker, she was allowed entry into the Warsaw Ghetto to check on, epidemics, typhus, that sort of thing. And because she had that ability to enter the ghetto, she realized she had to take action to save particularly children. And the documentary goes into the very painful decision that Jewish mothers in the ghetto had to make.
I can't even imagine.
When they gave birth, to give their newborn babies, to get them outside of the ghetto, which was an incredibly difficult decision.
And so families would hand them over to her, and then she found safe haven for those children in some of these orphanages.
That's right.
Amazing.
And her team.
And her team.
Yeah. She said there were 5 others when the Germans first invaded. There was 5 others that had the same idea to rescue Jewish children.
I would imagine she would have faced at least persecution herself, if not death, for what she did. How did she manage to get around that?
She herself was tortured.
She was.
That's right. She was sentenced to death.
She was.
The documentary goes into when the Gestapo, knocked on her door and then turned her apartment upside down and then arrested her and tortured her. The story is she was the Polish government in exile had a organization called Ghetto, which basically was to help to save Polish Jews. And as she was being, her death or execution warrant had been signed, let's say, Ghetto was able to bribe some of the German guards, and she was able to survive. The rest of the people in the transport were killed, but she was able to survive because they...
It was a royal ransom.
Yeah.
They had to bribe,
What a story.
but successfully.
Was she ever able to reunite any of the children with their family members?
In many cases, yes, but some were not reunited. Some were given over to Jewish orphanages and so on. And many, well, some of them we learned years later. I was participating in one such case of a priest who actually, he was one of those in a monastery. He decided to become a priest, and actually he traveled later to Israel. He learned Hebrew and so on. He started working in Yad Vashem, but he was still true to his oath, and he considered himself Jewish and Christian and a priest.
Wow. So how do we help keep these stories alive? Through documentaries, through telling these stories? This is something that you cover.
We struggle with that because there's no more powerful testimony than having a person who actually lived through it.
Yeah.
And that is actually something that our Holocaust Museum is sort of trying to figure out. There's, I don't know if you've done this, Mr. Rollat, but there's actually an effort underway perhaps to create holograms, believe it or not, of survivors where they can actually
tell their own
story, and they're interactive. Now, some people think it's a little odd, but I actually like the idea because it's, especially for young people, it appeals to their their technology, let's say, instead of reading about it in a book or even seeing a film on it. I think actually the immediacy of having someone like that, a hologram of an actual survivor that you can interact with, is really quite powerful.
So tell me how you spend your time as our special envoy for Holocaust issues. What is your mission?
My main mission is to try to engage with the governments of Central and Eastern Europe to get back property or some form of compensation, restitution for Holocaust survivors and their families. That's the main focus of my job. And Heather, as you can imagine, it's not easy. It's not something governments fall over themselves to do. And it's also, you would think 7 years after the end of the war, what's there left to be done? And there's actually a lot to be done. And so most of my job is travel, a lot of travel, going to Central and Eastern Europe countries, Poland, Hungary, Latvia, Croatia, others, to try to get these governments to resolve the remaining Holocaust-era property restitution issues. But a part of it also is Holocaust education and remembrance. And this is something that that really appeals to me also. And I get to meet people like Mr. Rollat here. I first met him just today. And so that's also a part of my job.
And are you also working to try to bring back art to the families perhaps who originally owned it, property, things of that nature too?
We are. That's a much more, we deal mainly in immovable property, actual real estate, but that is looted art, Nazi looted art as we call it, is a growing field, and we work to try to get museums to do the research, what's called provenance research, and we have seen some successes. You probably saw the movie Woman in Gold. Now we didn't have, my office didn't have anything to do with that, but it goes along the lines how important this issue has become, where you'll see a work of art that's hanging in a museum and someone will actually visit the museum and say, that used to belong to my family. How do you then
about the Austrian, about the movie.
Which helps tell the story of what so many people went through. So as we look at remembering the Holocaust, and we see that so many Holocaust survivors aren't with us today, we have the good fortune that Mr. Rollat not only is a survivor, but is able to tell his story of survival. What do you want people to know about remembering the Holocaust?
Well, I think it's important not just for, I think some think that it's just for a commemoration for Israel or for Jews, but it's not. It was such a tragic, unique event in human history that it really has a message for all of humanity. And I think it's particularly important for young people. And we had some young students today taking part, participating in the event, where I was very happy to see, because that is really the target audience, let's say. They need to remember what the Holocaust is, what it was about, why it's important, why we need to remember it. And we need to remember it mainly because so it never happens again. And that's the motto of our Holocaust Museum, and it's a good motto to live by.
Well, sir, you're certainly a national treasure to the United States, and we are very grateful that you were able to come to the State Department today with your family and help tell the story of a woman who meant so much to you. And you described her as a saint, and really a woman who was able to save that many lives. Truly sounds like a saint, I think, to many people. And
Thank you.
sir, for the work that you do on behalf of the American government and so many families, thank you, and would like to chat with you certainly again.
Thanks very much.
Thanks a lot for joining us. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Tag TV US Canada brings you news and views from White House and State Department's press briefing.